There's no turning back now. What's planted is planted.
Hopefully all of our favorite crops are growing strong, like this sweet corn here, and all the hard work that we put into our seedlings and plugs is going to pay off.
The onions are swelling up and close to go time. The garlic even closer. No doubt though, the heat will soon be here, so we're maximizing crops like this overachieving romaine lettuce here. The peppers have been given the best location and best chance to succeed. All that's needed now is a little hand-holding and a lot of water.
In case you missed it though, this is Garden Quickies Volume 29, episodes 281 to 290. Enjoy.
For the most part, deep green leaves indicates a healthy plant.
And healthy plants are what wheat growers need if we want to achieve those epic harvests.
One of the first indicators that something is wrong with our crops are the leaves changing color. Just because our plants can't talk to us doesn't mean they don't tell us everything.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we do nothing but listen to plants.
And that's because in today's episode, they tell us everything. Specifically, why do leaves change color and what does each color mean? Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Leaves change color eventually. It's all part of their natural cycle.
It's the leaf color during the growth part of the life cycle that says a lot about the plant's health and condition, and it can be an indicator that we need to take action.
Chlorophyll, the green pigment within the leaves, stops being produced in the fall when the light hours decrease and the temperatures drop, leaving behind just the yellows, oranges, and reds. That's fine because that signals dormancy and is completely natural. But we're not talking about the fall leaf drop here. When you break it down, leaves change color due to three main stresses: temperature, nutrients, and water. It's the color they change to that tells us which stress we need to focus on.
Keep in mind that we're not talking about crops that are naturally not green anyways, like this Swiss chard here.
Some crops, particularly the leafy ones like lettuce and chards, are naturally colorful anyway. It doesn't mean that anything's wrong. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to focus on the crops with green leaves. If you take a plant that, when healthy, has dark green leaves and it starts to change color, well, it could be an indicator that something is wrong. Yellow almost always indicates a nutrient deficiency, typically nitrogen, insufficient light, or water stress. Red, or sometimes purple, usually indicates an increase in sugars, which is a response to either the incorrect wavelengths of light or temperatures that are too low. These two things lead to a phosphorus deficiency in the plants, even when the element is available in sufficient amounts. And finally, dark brown, black, or wilting either indicates dehydration, extreme heat, or worse, fungal disease. Knowing what the colors mean and their causes allows us to take action and solve the underlying issues to bring back our plants to where they should be.
Just like you should be checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie.
The weather is warming and the mercury is rising, and our thoughts are of course fully fixated on our gardens.
Planting is well underway, and some of our inside stuff has already been growing since the middle of winter. For our peppers though, if we want to be successful with them this year, patience is key.
Just because the threat of frost is behind us and the amount of green outside is growing by the day doesn't mean that it's safe for everything.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we keep all your plants out of danger.
Which is why today's episode is all about our peppers. Specifically, when is it safe to plant them outside? Time short as you know what is, so let's dive in. Most plants that are started early indoors can be taken outside on or around your last spring frost date. This is the specific date on the calendar when there's finally less than a 50% chance of frost happening that night. It's different for every zone and every climate. You simply have to look it up for your area.
On this date, it's generally safe to finally plant our indoor starters and plugs outside. Peppers, however, are a little more sensitive. And by little, I mean a lot.
Prolonged exposure at or below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even if fully hardened off, can severely stunt your peppers, if not kill them entirely.
With these guys, it's less about that frost date, which is important, no doubt, but it's more about consistently staying above a threshold temperature.
Even at 70 to 75 degrees air temperature, the soil below in your garden can be much colder, running the risk of your peppers getting transplant shock. If a hard date of when to plant outside is what you need, sadly, peppers will not oblige. Usually, you can feel safe planting 2 to 3 weeks after that last spring frost date, but it's always best to check the forecast and check the coming temperatures. Even better than that is to dig down about a foot and check the actual soil temperature. Look for it to be 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit and above, and only then will you know that it's safe to set your peppers free.
And in the meantime, we can check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie.
There's something special about a crop that grows so easily, is virtually pest-free, and lasts for up to 6 months after the harvest, just waiting for us to dig in.
Other than maybe garlic, onions have got to be the most banger of a crop to grow at home.
It needs a few things from us to get the most out of the bulb in the end, but once we master that, we're on easy street.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we'll take easy over hard any day.
Because today's episode is all about our bulb onions, specifically planting them in containers. What do we need to know, and when do we get started? Time short as it always is, so let's get started right now. Planting onions in a container-style setup is actually quite simple.
And we're really only concerned with 4 things: soil, size, spacing, and then location.
The rules for onions in containers is no different from the rules when planting them in the ground. But because we're filling the pots with the soil, it might as well be the best. Onions love it loose, rich, high in organic content, constantly moist but also not soggy, and definitely draining well.
Basically, any generic potting or container mix is gonna do. You can buy it at the store or you can make it yourself at home.
For size, onions still need to be planted 4 to 6 inches apart, so the amount of onions you get per container is going to depend on your container's diameter. Depth is also key, as onions like a little bit more soil than their garlic cousins. 10 to 12 inches is necessary because by the time you harvest them, those onion roots have gone down surprisingly far. For actual planting, just like with planting in the ground or raised beds, onions can be planted in 3 ways: seeds, sets, and starters. By far the best way to grow bulb onions is from starters, so we're going to focus there. If the other two methods interest you, check out the description below for more videos on onion planting.
Depth with starter onions is super easy because we simply plant to the existing root color that's already there. By now, the bulbs have started to form, so this part is dead simple.
I often grow up my starter onions in compostable cups, and sometimes I just leave them in. If you're growing yours in plastic pots or you don't want to leave those cups in the soil, you can simply make an impression, pop out the onion starter, and then put it in the hole. Easy peasy.
Mulch and water right away, and our onions are ready for their last requirement, and that's the sun.
Like all alliums, onions are a full sun crop. This means that they require 6 to 8 hours of full direct sunlight per day. They need it to perform their best, and this one is non-negotiable.
As is checking out more episodes of the Garden Quickie.
It got planted over 6 months ago, and we haven't really had to do anything with it since.
The massive growth we're getting right now, though, doesn't come for free. And if we want to get another huge harvest this year, what we do right now is going to determine it.
The cloves have spent the last half year expanding the root network below the soil, preparing for this exact moment. It's our job now to push our garlic over the edge to ensure that we get that harvest that we've been patiently waiting for.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, it's pretty obvious we're wild about garlic.
Because today's episode is once again all about it. Specifically, when and what with do we fertilize our garlic? Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Spacing, planting depth, moisture, large cloves, and a good soil. Best practices for our garlic that set us up for the most success.
That's great, all things that our garlic needed at the time. Now, though, it's all about that final stretch, the push to actually achieving those big, beautiful garlic bulbs. And the secret to that is fertilizer.
Even though our garlic was planted nearly 7 months ago, the majority of that time those cloves lay dormant, at least on the top. So other than the nutrients that were already in the soil, it hasn't been fed or fertilized yet.
In fact, hardneck garlic is only ever fed twice in its entire 10-month life cycle, and both of those times are in the spring.
The timing is simple. Feed your garlic once the ground thaws and those shoots start to emerge. If the garlic shoots have already popped up but the ground is still frozen, wait for it to thaw.
That's feeding number one. Then, about a month later, give your garlic another round of fertilization just for good measure. But that's it, just those 2 feedings.
This is where I'm at right now. I fed my garlic about a month ago, and it's time to give it its second feeding. However, and this is a big one with this crop, all garlic needs its fertilizing stopped at least 4 to 6 weeks before you intend to harvest it. Otherwise, the flavor of the garlic may be affected, and most certainly the storability of those bulbs will be lessened. No ifs, ands, or buts. No feeding your garlic within a month of harvest time.
As for what to feed, balance works great, and it's always my first choice for these long and slow crops like garlic.
One note though, garlic bulbs are just like onion bulbs in that they're simply a set of modified leaves. As such, when picking a fertilizer for your garlic, it doesn't hurt to skew slightly higher in nitrogen. Nitrogen, of course, is highly responsible for foliar and leaf growth, and it's the first of the three numbers on the front of the label. Balanced is best, but more nitrogen certainly won't hurt.
The other thing that won't hurt is making sure to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie.
Yes, it takes up a lot of space and eats up a lot of resources, but corn is fairly straightforward, and rarely does it give us any problems.
Provided we get its spacing correct right from the start.
Of course, crops can be picky about having the correct amount of space to grow, but corn is next level in its need for the proper orientation and layout.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, your corn is in safe hands.
Because today's episode is all about it. Specifically, why and how to get your corn properly spaced as you plant it. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. All plants need the right spacing to grow. Our tomatoes, our peppers, the carrots, and even the radishes. It's not something that's unique to corn.
Corn, however, needs that perfect spacing for an additional reason, and that's pollination.
The male flowers on top of the stalks, known as tassels, drop pollen by gravity and wind to the female pollen tubes below, known as the silks. Each pollen tube connects to a single kernel, and if any of those pollen tubes does not get fertilized, well, it won't develop a proper corn kernel.
So, we know that corn needs about 8 to 10 inches of space between the stalks, and we also know that it needs to be planted in blocks of 3+ rows instead of just one long straight line.
But how do we accomplish this? Well, we can plant our corn in 3 ways. We can simply plant at the exact spacing that we need and hope for the best. At 100% germination, the outcome will be perfect. Less though, and we're going to be left with gaps and improper spacing. Next, we can simply sew the seeds tighter together and then thin after the corn sprouts. This offers a little bit more insurance, but it's not guaranteed. If all the corn sprouts, we can simply thin and get that spacing we want. But if not all those seeds germinate, again, we can be left with large gaps. The best way to plant our corn is to sow 2 to 3 seeds per spot. Even at a lowly 30% viability rate, we're still guaranteed to get 1 corn sprout per 8 to 10 inch spacing. Like with the second method, if more than 1 corn seed sprouts, simply thin to the strongest plant. This'll give you that perfect 8 to 10 inch spacing per plant in multiple rows or blocks every time. No muss, no fuss, easy peasy.
Almost as easy as checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie.
For an already overproducing plant, it's hard to imagine it getting any better.
But for some pepper varieties, it's entirely possible to jack up that harvest even more.
Pruning means different things for different crops. Health maintenance, pest protection, or even just aesthetics. In the case of some peppers, though, it can mean a serious bump in the bounty.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, anytime is pepper time.
Which is great because today's episode is all about them. More specifically, pruning for production. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Peppers, like their cousins the tomato, are a fruiting crop. and they're born from fairly insignificant yet pretty white flowers. The more flowers the plant produces, the more peppers we get to harvest. And like a lot of plants, the flowers and fruit appear at the apical tips of the leading shoots.
Pepper plants naturally seem to grow quite bushy anyways, but one way to increase the amount of flowers, and thus the fruit, is to increase the amount of leading stems. This is where pruning or topping comes in.
When a terminal stem or shoot is cut in a plant like peppers, two or more leading shoots take its place. It's really evident and appears almost immediately in plants like basil. Obviously, this encourages branching and bushiness, and in some pepper varieties, it can greatly increase the amount of leading shoots that produce flowers.
More flowers means more fruit. In theory, this should be an absolute slam dunk. Unfortunately, it's not always the case.
A few years back, I did an experiment with 20 large bell pepper plants. The results were pretty disappointing and not this massive theorized increase.
As I dug deeper into pruning and topping pepper plants, I came to realize that variety plays a huge role in how well this works.
Large, heavy peppers do not seem to benefit from this, as there's a finite amount of peppers that the plant can produce and even hold at one time. Making them branch out and become bushier is not gonna solve this.
Smaller varieties, however, is where it gets interesting. And I'm going to be doing the same experiment with these jalapenos here.
So, if you have a smaller pepper variety and you'd like to follow along at home, basically top your pepper plant at the first or second node. You want that plant to have at least 2 nodes remaining, so topping your peppers is best done when they're at least 10 to 12 inches in height. Usually a couple months old.
For me, the results of this experiment are going to take another 2 to 3 months or so. So, in the meantime, follow along at home with your peppers and check out some more episodes of the Garden Quickie.
Do you ever get the feeling that the plants you really want to grow and do well with don't? But when you don't pay any attention to them or even really try, they absolutely flourish?
Well, you're not alone. As one of the most backwards and upside down things to happen in our garden, it's also one of the most common.
Volunteers. Pleasantly surprising while at the same time mildly annoying. I feel like they finally deserve an explanation, even if it is quick.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, quick explanations are our game.
And today's episode is definitely one of them. This time, it's volunteers. What are they? Where do they come from? And why do we get them? Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. We hear the term almost every season, but just what are volunteers?
Well, it's pretty simple. A volunteer is a plant that sprouts and grows all on its own without any help or intention from you, the grower.
They quietly emerge either in the spring or summer from seeds that are already in the soil, distributed by wind, or even dropped by birds. Homemade compost is a huge contributor to volunteers in the garden.
But why do we care though? Why do volunteers even matter? Well, for one, it can be interesting, if not informative, to see a crop doing randomly well on its own versus when we tried to grow that same crop and it gave us nothing but trouble.
It's definitely baffling, if not infuriating, but it also makes sense. Think of a volunteer plant as a weed, because essentially, that's what it is. That plant is only there because the conditions for its growth and success are perfect, with no extra help from us. We only see it because out of all the locations where the seeds didn't sprout, this is the one where it did.
And it explains why volunteers outperform other crops, even other crops of the exact same variety.
However, it may all not be rosy. Common volunteer crops such as tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and even strawberries that we see randomly sprouting often come from hybrid origins. This is especially true if you use your own compost and you buy fruits and vegetables from the store. Seeds from that source are likely not open pollinated or heirloom and are most definitely hybrids. While the volunteer plants may grow and look amazing, the harvests might not be.
What is amazing, though, is watching the next episode of the Garden Quickie.
As a fast and aggressive grower, this crop is a surprisingly poor competitor for weeds, at least early on.
Of course, we're talking corn. This sweet early variety absolutely towers over its little competitors, but I'm still not taking them lightly.
Corn is one crop that has a specific critical window of weed control that directly affects its ability to produce a harvest later on, more so than any other crop.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we've got your corn covered.
Because today's episode is all about it. Specifically, when, why, and how often should we be weeding our corn? The answer is surprising, but time's short, so let's dive in. Corn is not only a poor weed competitor, but it also doesn't like being disturbed when weeding. Quite the conundrum, isn't it?
For such a wimp when it comes to weeds, fortunately, we only ever have to weed our corn twice.
First is before the corn seedlings get their third leaf, also known as the spike stage. This is normally an easy one because quite likely the area has just been cleaned and cleared to plant the corn. Any new weeds that have sprouted are only going to be as old as the corn itself. They should pull up no problem, causing minimal disturbance to the soil as well as the corn.
The next weeding will be a little bit more tricky, but also more important, as this is the last time your corn gets weeded.
This window, called the 3 to 8 stage, is after the spike stage when the plant gets its third leaf, but before it gets more than 8. The stalk should be less than a foot tall, and hopefully the weeds are too. It's absolutely critical to the harvest to eliminate weeds at this time, but it's also important to do it carefully. Soak the ground thoroughly before starting to make those weeds easier to pull up. After this, the corn is on its own, and it should be large enough and tall enough to shade out any competitors without any help from us.
Which is great because that leaves us even more time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie.
It's a 9 to 10 month crop, sure, but there's a few milestones thrown in to keep the long wait interesting.
Of course, we're talking about hardneck garlic, and today it's all about the scapes.
Curly, tough but bendy spikes that appear about 6 to 8 weeks before the harvest. Garlic scapes are awesome, but they have to go.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, your garlic is in safe hands.
Because today's episode is all about it. This time, it's the scapes. What are they? Why do we have to remove them? And when do we do it? Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. There's very few things outside of planting it at the right time that we need to do to be successful with hardneck garlic.
But one of those things is removing the scapes in the early summer. Why is that though? Why do we care? And why is removing them so important?
Scapes are the impressive edible flowers of hardneck varieties of garlic, and they appear once the plant reaches its max height, sometime in the late spring.
That's great, but it still doesn't tell us why we need to remove them.
Once the scape begins to bend and curl and is about the thickness of a pencil, cut it all the way back to where it emerges from the top set of leaves.
Easy, yes, but it still doesn't tell us why it's so necessary and why it's so important.
Flowers are a drain on every plant, but especially hardneck garlic. It's one thing when the crop's flowers are necessary and useful, like say tomatoes or peppers, but garlic is inherently sterile, and those flowers are essentially useless. By weight, it can approach half the mass of the entire plant itself, and left on is going to result in a tiny harvest, if any at all. Fear not though, it isn't a total loss. Not only are those scapes completely edible, but they're also delicious, raw or cooked. Everything has a purpose.
Just like our purpose is to keep watching more episodes of the Garden Quickie.
It's been going on for nearly 9 months now, but the end is near and we're getting excited.
Of course, we're talking about our hardneck garlic. This is the final stretch, and the bulbs have never been so close.
For such a long crop, it's relatively low maintenance. Not quite plant and forget it completely, but almost. There are, however, a few key things that we can do right now to ensure that we get the largest harvest possible.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, after all these years, we're still garlic obsessed.
Because today's episode is all about it. Specifically, what do we need to do down the final stretch to get the most out of our garlic harvest? I got 4 things, time's short, so let's dive in. Hardneck garlic is a unique crop in that it needs to overwinter in the ground to trigger the formation of a bulb the following summer. As such, it's an extremely long crop to grow, and you'd think that there'd be a lot of things that could go wrong.
Actually, though, hardneck garlic is pretty trouble-free. In fact, it's pretty hard not to get a harvest from these guys. However, we don't just want a harvest. We want the best harvest. And for hardneck garlic, that starts with getting rid of the scapes.
The scapes are the edible flowers of hardneck garlic that appear in the late spring when the foliage has reached its full height.
Cool and tasty, but they still gotta go. They're a drain on the plants and thus the developing bulbs. You gotta get rid of the scapes, especially at this critical time.
Cut off your scapes right down to the base when they start to bend and curl and are about pencil thickness.
Next, we gotta stay on top of those weeds.
This has been an ongoing procedure, but if you mulched and weeded diligently in the spring, this is no big deal. Still, keep that garlic clear and clean of any competition if you want to get those really big bulbs.
This is because weeds compete for the 2 biggest resources, water and nutrients.
Garlic needs the surrounding soil to stay consistently moist if we want those bulbs to develop properly. However, it should never be soaking wet. As well, Stop all watering at least 2 weeks before the intended harvest because we need to pull those garlic bulbs dry if we want to cure them properly. With feeding and fertilizing, garlic only ever needs to be fed twice in its entire life cycle. The first of those times is in the early spring, and the next time is right now. Any balanced liquid fertilizer will do, and if you can, maybe skew a bit higher in nitrogen. All feedings, however, need to be stopped at least a month before the harvest. Excess nutrients in the soil close to the harvest date will most certainly negatively affect the bulbs.
Know what won't negatively affect those bulbs? Making sure to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie.
Thanks for watching, guys. And hey, if Garden Quickies are your thing, make sure to subscribe and click on this playlist here as we explore and solve more growing issues in 2 minutes or less.